the initial challenge is, well, how do you go about even laying out a thread on a big wooden dowel? One way that it has been done in the past, and these wooden screw threads have been cut by hand for centuries, is to take a ribbon, wrap the ribbon around your shaft, and then use the ribbon as a guide for a thread pitch. But this is a little bit more controllable method, where you wrap your paper around your dowel, and then you very carefully mark where the paper overlaps. And when you open the paper up, you have a very accurate measurement of the diameter of your dowel. And then from that, you flatten out your paper, and you decide, I'm going to have 2 threads per inch. So you take your measurement stick and you start marking out 1/2 inch, 1 inch, 1.5 inches to down the edge of the paper each side, and then connect the Mark 1 with Mark 2, Mark 2 with Mark 3, because the way the threads work is that if you go around the dowel 1 diameter, you advance down the length of the dowel by 1/2 inch. So you end up with a layout for your threads, and then you have this spiral pencil line around the dowel. You can take your little dovetail saw, and of course you want to clamp this ideally, and you start making a very shallow saw cut by hand following your spiral pencil line. From there, once you have your kerf cut all the way around, then you're faced with the project of taking that spiral saw kerf and turning it into a screw thread. And in the old days, a screw maker would simply take a V chisel and they would put it in a vise, and they would start taking material away to create the spiral thread, and eventually they would go to a triangular file, and they would just shape this thread until they liked the look of it. And for their purposes, that was plenty accurate. You know, it's not machine shop accuracy, but worked very well for centuries. One place where you see screw threads quite a bit is in old spinning wheels, where a lot of the spinning wheel adjustment is done with these wooden threads of varying diameter. I did try hand carving threads, and I realized it could be done, but I also kind of realized that there's got to be a better way in the modern world. And so what I hit on was a system for, once I got the saw kerf cut in the dowel, this metal plate, I carved out a slot here so that the metal plate will follow what started out as a saw kerf. And then clamp the router in there, and then run the screw through. And I had a 60-degree V router bit down where I wanted it. So once I perfected that technique for cutting the final thread with the router, I was able to produce a couple of these big vice screws. But the other problem, the other challenge was, of course, to make the nut, the internal thread, to match the external thread. And that turned out to be, in a way, more of a technical challenge than making the screw thread itself. But this is not at all my invention. This is another system for hand cutting wood threads that has been around for centuries. It's similar in some ways to a modern thread cutting tap for metal, except that it employs this metal tooth. There's a metal tooth that protrudes from the thread cutting dowel, and where a metal cutting tap pretty much cuts the thread in one go. This requires that you make many, many passes, maybe 8 or 10 passes through your nut in order to gradually cut out the internal threads. So it's a kind of a time-consuming process to cut threads, particularly on hardwood like maple. This is all hard eastern maple. I also made a nut out of walnut. The walnut is much easier to work, but I ended up deciding I really wanted a maple nut. You start with your cutter tooth retracted into your thread cutting fixture, and you clamp the whole thing in a vise, and then you take your crank handle, you move your cutter slowly through the work, and it finally will come out the far end. Then you slowly retract it back into your thread cutting fixture, and then you take your nut off, and then you slightly extend your cutter and you go through the whole process again. It gradually cuts. It gradually cuts an internal thread that matches the pitch and the depth of the screw. You know, most hand woodworking, it's very time consuming. I have no idea. Weeks, probably, but not 8-hour days, weeks, but, you know, a long time. You know, normally this would be the position it will be in on the workbench. This is the nut, which is attached to the workbench. This is the vice jaw.